We can pray. Hello, everyone. So nice to see you again. Happy 2022. It's going to be a great year. We've got a lot of fun, exciting things planned for you. And today, to start off, we're going to just start off with kind of taking it back to basics and thinking about some of the ways that we can ease our frustration when it comes to our sewing machines. I love our Husqvarna Viking sewing machines, but sometimes when we're sewing, we start to have challenges and we're not really sure why. And almost all of the time, there are simple things we can do to solve our problems and to make things easier for us. So I have the Opal 690Q here. I've got the Sapphire 85 and also the Epic 2. We're going to look at threading and we're going to look at some ways to make sure that you're getting the best results you can. Today, I know we have some people that are brand new sewers, some that have been sewing for 30 or 40 years, but we can all learn new things. And sometimes the people that have been sewing the longest have the worst habits. So I'm hoping that you'll all enjoy what we're going to be doing today. And for those of you that have been working with our sewing machines for 20 years, we've had these green bobbins, and these have been the staple until the Epic and Epic 2 came out, and the Ruby 90 now. That is a brand new class of bobbin, which is a bigger class, but all of the bobbins work exactly the same way. So I wanted to take it. We're going to start with the Opal 690Q, looking at winding a bobbin, threading, putting your bobbin in, and some things that maybe you may not realize that might make your life a little bit easier. So I'm going to switch my camera over and we're going to go on and look at our Opal 690Q. Now, the way that this is set up right now, I have the large spool cap at the end, and then I have the little felt that's on there. The felt doesn't make as much difference when you're sewing, but when you're winding a bobbin, it really can make the bobbin winding a little bit quieter. And then I have a small spool cap on here. I've seen a lot of people set their machine up with a small spool like this and then put the larger spool cap on it. But this actually creates a problem for you because often the thread will get caught inside here and then you can break a needle, or there's other things that'll happen because the thread can't spool off anymore. You can see it kind of feels like it's tighter. So the way to set it up is to always have the spool holder be the same size, just a tiny bit bigger than the spool that you have in place. Now, right now, I'm set up for winding a bobbin. If I look in my book, I can see, and there is some pretty good guidance in the book, in your owner's manual. Like, for example, here's the owner's manual for this one. It does give you some pretty great pictures of how to wind a bobbin, and that can be really helpful. They're suggesting that you put it up and like this, and then come over here into this metal piece, and you're going to put your bobbin winder on, your bobbin on the bobbin winder right here like this. Now there is a little hole in our newer bobbins, but our older bobbins didn't have a hole in them. And sometimes our because of our ability to see, we may find that it's hard to see that little hole. So I want to show you a special trick that I have for winding bobbins on this bobbin winder. Now, when I bring the thread up, it's going to go up through this hole right here like this, right? And then I got in the habit of doing this because I'm left-handed. And so what I do is I hold the thread with my left hand just so it's got a little bit of a tail, and then I wind it backwards. And I can put this down for now so you can see better. And I've got just a short little tail. I'm holding the thread to the top of the bobbin. I wind it backwards a couple of times and push it over. Make sure it's seated properly. Now, the 690Q does not have a separate bobbin winder, so I'm going to use the bobbin, the presser foot. And when I put the presser foot on, you'll see the bobbin thread picks up right away. I don't have any extra thread hanging off. And that's going to give me a really nice, even bobbin. And so that's just a little trick if you have trouble seeing in the and I think I'm going to bring that up there closer to you. You can kind of see there's the bobbin. There's no extra thread hanging off. And the reason it worked well was because I hold the thread in my right hand and I wind it over the top and backwards a couple of times, and that just locks it in. Then you push it back off and you have a thread cutter up here. Now, if you wanted to wind the bobbin through the needle, you're going to have this down on all of our machines. Whether it's a Lily or, you can go back to all of our older machines, even our sapphires, our platinums. Now, if I'm going to wind, if I'm going to thread my machine, one of the things that makes a big difference is to put some pressure on the thread. Don't just be loosey-goosey about it coming around like this. I like to take my fingers on my right hand, hold the thread, and be very firm. I know many of you have heard the expression that you can floss the thread through the tension. I think a better way of thinking about it is, instead of thinking about it as flossing it, you really just want to be very firm, not loosey-goosey. Come up here onto the take-up arm and then back. You can see it's caught because it hasn't dropped away. And then I'm going to come down to the little hook above the needle. And then the next thing I'm going to do is thread my needle. Now, at this point, now that I've been doing this, my foot has been up the whole time. One of the problems that a lot of people experience is when they are threading their machine, they forget to put their presser foot up. And so the tension's closed up here. It's very important that when you're threading your machine, that your presser foot is up. And if you're not sure if it's up, just touch the button and put it up into the highest position, and then you know for sure. If the presser foot is down or in the pivot position, just a little bit above it, and you're threading your machine, the thread is not going into the tension. It's just kind of sitting outside there and floating. And so when you start to sew, you're going to get a message that will say that there's a thread error, that there's something not in the tension. And so making sure that you have your presser foot up in the highest position will solve almost all of those problems. When I get down to the bottom and I'm at the needle, then I do like to put the presser foot down because it gives me more clearance for my hands. And now when I bring my automatic needle threader down, I can click the thread through the little loop on the left, and then I put it in place, and then I let it go, and there's my loop that I can pull through. And I don't have to put a lot of extra effort because the foot was down out of the way. There was a lot more room for my hands. And that makes a big, big difference too. So no matter what machine you have, if you have any of the machines that have the sensor system where the foot goes up and down on its own, sometimes we just don't realize the significance of having the foot in that higher position when you're threading your machine. Now, I've over the years heard lots of people complain that the bobbin, when you're finished using it, has a little bit too much thread left on it. When the bobbin sensor goes off, it'll go off when it starts to see green bobbin on the inside when the thread has kind of gone away from a certain area to it. What I think many of you don't know is that, let me move this back just a little bit here. So if I'm sewing, and I'll get a piece of fabric here and put it underneath, I have a bobbin that doesn't have a lot of thread on it right now. When I start sewing, I'm going to just put my foot down and start sewing. My thread is underneath my foot into the back, which is the best way to start off when you start sewing. And now as I start sewing, I get a message on my machine that says my bobbin is running low. Now, what most people's automatic response is to do is to touch the OK, but that actually will make your machine think that you weren't paying attention to it. If you leave the message up and just keep sewing, it will let you sew and use every last inch that you've got. All right. And I've got no more thread left. Now, when I'm done, I can take this out and rewind my bobbin. But that will let us keep going. And that's a really nice feature to be able to do. when you're on your machines. Now, when we look at the difference between the Sapphire 85, here I have a larger spool, and I have the largest spool cap on in place. If I was using a larger spool, like this is one that's just a little bit longer, sometimes I can make a choice not to use the spool holder that's on this end. Now, I don't need to have it off for here, but this is a longer spool. So in this case, if I have a little bit longer spool like that, I'm going to remove that end so that there's more room for that spool to stay on there. This won't work, however, when you get to be having large spools like this. And once you get into larger spools that are quilting or embroidery threads, they do not sit up very well like this. This will not work very well. So there is a single hole stand that you can get that will go on machines like this that will allow you to use these larger spools. And then there's also this option of having the 8-spool thread holder that I have behind here. This spool will come up and the threads will come up to the top. And then it goes, there's a little metal piece or a plastic piece that goes into this little loop right here. And then the thread comes in, use your regular sewing path for the rest of the way to thread your machines. So sometimes these things are just a little bit different, but a lot of it, as long as it's working for you, that's the most important thing. Now, the one thing that is different about a Sapphire 85 is this got a separate step motor. So when I put a bobbin onto this machine and I put it into place, instead of using the foot pedal, I'm going to be using the mechanics that touch here like this, and that's going to wind the bobbin. If I put my foot on the foot pedal on a diamond or a ruby or a sapphire 85, the foot pedal doesn't work because these machines have a separate step motor, and they're set up so that you can be embroidering and winding a bobbin at the same time, which is kind of nice. Now, I'm not sure if anybody has any questions, please let me know. As we get going, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail, but I do want you to start thinking about, is there anything particular that you really want to know about your machine? Because I know there's a lot of new owners or people that have challenges. Now, that is a good question. Somebody asked a question about how do you keep the threads from your 8-spool thread holder from tangling? There is, when you're looking at the top, all right, what you don't want to do is have your threads, all right, where you have them in place. You don't want to leave these hanging up here like this. Not only will they tangle, but a bigger problem is if you've got air conditioning in your room or any kind of fan blowing, they can blow and catch into the flywheel on your machine. So it is a good idea, even though you have the place for those 8 spools, that once you finish, you wind the thread back up. I know this is probably not the answer you want to hear, but this is the reality, that you're better off not having the thread tails hanging up here. You should only have them, I know this gives you a weird angle here. You should only have the thread of the one you're using at the time, and the rest of them should be down below and caught into place like it would be a regular spool. And mostly that's to avoid the threads from blowing and coming into the hand wheel over here. Now, I don't know if you know this, but many of you have had a challenge with your bobbin winder not winding your bobbins full. Do you realize that this is meant to be adjusted? If your bobbin is not winding as full as you want to, it will rotate left or right to fill the bobbin less or more. So if I rotate it to the right, it will allow more thread on. And if I go to the left, it will put less thread on. I think that gives you there. And a lot of our machines have this same type of thing. If you're looking at the bobbin for the opal, it's got a little screw there but it does the same thing. It can be adjusted so that you can have your bobbin fill more or less. When we're going over onto the Epic 2, it has the same kind of a little lever there that can be adjusted. Let's see if there's any other questions. So for the 8-spool thread holder, there are 2 pieces that come with it. One of them is a metal piece, and one of it is a plastic piece. I think on the diamond for the 8-spool thread holder, it is using the plastic piece. So for the person who had a question about the 8-spool thread holder, check that out. There's 2 different pieces that came with your 8-spool thread holder. So if the metal piece is not working, that would have been for the older machines. Check the plastic piece out and see if that works. Now we are going to go and talk a little bit more about some of the symbols that are on our machine that we're not sure of, and we don't realize when we're looking at our machine. So I'm going to go back to the the opal, and I'm going to choose a different stitch. So if I'm choosing a stitch, I'm going to go up here and choose, let's see, we're going to choose menu 4, and I'm going to choose, let's see what I'm going to choose here. Now I think I'm going to go to menu 1, but I'm going to choose a satin stitch. So let's go to stitch number 35 and then touch OK. Now, if you notice, there's a symbol here. That is a symbol for stabilizer. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss what that means. But all of our machines, when we go to do a decorative stitch that has satin on it, it will recommend stabilizer. You can see on the back that I tear it away and you don't see it, but that is an important symbol to pay attention to. On the fabric that I have selected on my machine, I chose a woven light fabric. Now, depending upon what fabric you are working with, those settings will change. Right now, I'm looking at the stitch length is 0.8. The width is 0.4, and I can obviously change it if I want to. And then up above there, that is telling us our tension. By changing the fabric, you will get a different result, whether you choose a medium stretch or a vinyl. Each one of those options is going to give you a different setting. So it's a good idea when you turn your machine on to look and see what kind of setting, what kind of material you're going to use, and then any of those extra symbols, because it will recommend what needle to put on and also what if you need stabilizer or not. Now, we have a couple of questions. When it comes to which spool goes on the 8-spool thread holder, there is no specific place where you can put each spool. All of the 8 places you can put spools of thread, and you can bring them up to the thread holder above it and use the thread holder there. Another question. Oh, this is great. We're getting lots of great questions. So let me come back here. And somebody wanted to know if there's a felting kit for the Sapphire 965Q. Now, the felting kit is an embroidery kit that is meant to be used in embroidery, but you can use that on our regular sewing machines only in free motion though. So it is possible to do it. The newer machines that have the larger opening, like the Epic 2 and the Ruby 90, those machines have a little wider stitch plate, and I think there's something that's being changed in there. So we can get Meredith to check and see if there's a new part number for that. But I know right now that the existing kit that's been out for years is recommended for all of the other machines. But for the ones in the category 9, they have a little setting. Now that brings up a good question. How do you know which feet will work for your machine? And how do you know what they do, right? So I'm going to switch over here because one of my favorite places to get information is on the Husqvarna Viking website. I can go to the Accessory Catalog, and I think once you see this, this is going to help all of you. In the catalog, the first couple of pages, it does tell you all the different machines we have. So when I look at the machines, I can go back over 25 years and find my machine if I had a number 1 plus, or if I had a Prelude, the Epic 2s, the Epic 980Q. The Epic 980Q is number 8, for example. So then when you know what number your machine is, as you scroll through and you look at the different feet, like for example, this roller foot, up here it has a number 1 to 9. That means all of the machines that exist for Husqvarna Viking can use those feet. Some of them, they will have a different number. Like the edge joining foot over here, the J, it doesn't have a number 9 on it, which means there's probably a better foot for the Epic 2 because the Epic 2 is a number 9. So it really does help you. If whatever machine you have, no matter how old it is, you can pretty much look here, and as you scroll through, it will tell you the foot number, the part number that works for your machine. But even better still, as you scroll through, there is a really great listing for what hoops work with what embroidery machine. And I know sometimes, I'm just flipping through quickly here, sometimes we get a little bit, we want the answer right away. Maybe it's at midnight and you're trying to figure out if a metal hoop will work with your machine. So this is my best resource. I always come here, and in a couple of seconds, I can figure out which foot will work with which machine. And I'm just going to get to the part where the hoops are. There's all kinds of quilting things in here. And the list that I show, okay, this one here shows all the different embroidery machines and which hoop works with which machine. So that's a really nice place to be able to get your information and to be able to do what, to be able to figure out what hoops are going to work with your machine. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's there, but this is for everybody. And this catalog goes back 25 years. It gives you information. So it's a really great resource. And I wish more people would refer to it because it does give you so much information. Now, I recognize when there was a question about what spool goes on the 8 thread holder. I think you're meaning what tabs that they go in. Right now, the Brilliance 80 and the Sapphire 85 are using the tool tabs on the outside edges. So if you have an older 8-spool thread holder, there were different arms that come in, and by changing the placement, maybe you had an opal, that same spool holder will work. The 8-spool thread holder will also work for a Sapphire 85. We make it really, really easy for you to be able to upgrade and not have to buy all new parts. So that's kind of nice. Now, I am going to show you next how you can wind a bobbin through the needle, because I think that's an important thing that I love to do with our machines. All right, so I'm going to go back here. And before we get going, I'm going to answer one other question. There is a question from somebody about the Designer Diamond Royale and what is compatible. Just because I don't have the Designer Diamond Royale on the machine right now, on my table, the Sapphire 85 and the Diamond Royale are exactly the same in their abilities. So don't worry about if you don't see exactly your machine here, because right now I've got a picture of the Sapphire 85. The way things work on a Sapphire 85 is exactly they work on a Diamond Royale. There are some one of the questions is about the screws for the hoops, and you can order new screws and new parts for your hoops if you've lost some or you've broken something. You can get your dealer to order them. If they don't have them in stock, they are available, so you can order them. Okay. And then the last question I have is, I was told the feet that's saying 8 can be used on the Epic 2. That is correct. And I'll come back here to do this before I go on. All right. You can use your Epic 2, your original Epic or your Diamond Royale feet on your Epic 2. That is not a problem. There are some feet that have been made especially for the Epic 2. So if you were going to go and buy a new foot, it would be recommended that you buy one that's specially for your machine. That's why they have made the new feet. But if you have the old feet, they still work. So that's not a question at all. The larger, and I'll answer this last question here, Meredith, and then I'm going to get on to my next point, okay? So the last question is, can the larger cones work on the thread spools? They cannot work on the thread spools that you see standing right here, like this one or this one. But if you buy, there is a single hole spool holder. Whoops, hold on here. My camera went out there. If you buy the single hole spool holder, it's called the Mega Stand. It will go on, and then you can use the larger spools with that one. Meredith is going to post a part number for that single spool stand. And that one can work if you only want to have the large spools on that one stand. And that works really well with those 5,000 meter threads. But you need to have something special for it. You cannot do it with the ones that are right on the machine. Now, of course, if you think about the Epic 2, and it has, wait a second here, let me switch my camera. The Epic 2 has already got the telescopic threading, right? So you can use those very, very large spools on here. If you have the Epic 2 or the Sapphire, the 95Q, any of those machines that have this larger area with the telescopic threading, they're already set up for those huge spools. But if you're going to be on a machine like a Diamond Royale or a Sapphire 85, you're going to want to have something like the Mega Spool Stand so that it's going to level the spool off and it will feed the thread directly. What it's going to do is it's going to give you that telescopic threading that'll come up like the 8-spool thread holder. I hope that makes sense. All right, so we're going to go back to talking about winding our bobbins just a little bit more. All right, on all of our machines, our Husqvarna Vikings, one of our favorite things is that we can wind our bobbin from our needle. So I'm going to take my bobbin out, and you can see, look, I've got no thread left there. All right. Now, if I'm going to use my bobbin and wind the bobbin from the needle, there's a couple of things that are very important. One of them is you want to be working with a metal foot. You cannot use a plastic foot when you're winding a bobbin through the needle, because the plastic will heat up and it can cut a groove into the plastic. Look at the area on your machine. All of our machines will have a piece of metal that's across the front somewhere, and you know that that's where the bobbin thread's going to go. So to wind a bobbin from the needle, you're going to come across that place like that, and that is going to be protecting the machine. That's why they have it there. Then I'm going to put the bobbin into place. All right. And I'll show you the same way that I did the last time. You all know how to put the thread through the hole in the bobbin, right? But so that's why I'm showing you my special way of doing it, because not everybody knows that they can do it like that. So when you're winding your thread from the needle, you don't have a plastic foot on. You come across the part where the metal is, and then I will start up here like this first. I'll hold the thread in my right hand. I will go on top and wind it back a couple of times till I see it's locked. And then I will check my settings to make sure it's going through the little metal piece here and on there. And then I will do this. And then I kind of just like to watch it for a second. And I make sure that it's still holding that place. If the thread is not going along this metal piece, then you know you don't have it threaded right to do the winding for the bobbin, okay? So you can see there's a metal piece here and a metal piece here. Every machine looks a little bit different, but they're really pretty much the same. Here you can see on the Sapphire, you have them here. Now on the Epic 2, it's a little bit different, winding it from a needle. I'll go to the Epic 2 and show you what that looks like. If you're winding a thread from the Epic 2, you're going to go through the needle, underneath the foot. All right. So it's always the same. You always, I know it sounds weird, but you do want to put the thread through the needle, underneath the foot. And then on the Epic 2, you have this little metal piece here that is going to come and click in. And then you have that same metal piece up above right here. And then you're just winding it the same way you do if you were winding it from your machine. So it comes up here, and then it comes over to the side, and then down on the back. Okay? So there's your path. There's never a time where you're going to be winding a bobbin where the thread will touch the plastic of the machine without having a metal piece there. So that's what you're looking for. Look for the metal piece, and then you'll know you're winding it right. I think that answers that question, right? Let's see if there's any questions from that. All right, so I think that's good. All right, so when I start, I'm going to be back here, and I'm winding my thread, my bobbin. All right, I've got my bobbin going there. Remember, this is an automatic stop. I'm not going to wind the bobbin full. It's going up and down. Now, if any of you have ever had an experience where after you winded the bobbin, you can't get it off, like I'm going to pull it here and I try and lift it off and it won't come off, almost always what you're going to find is that if you come back here and look, your foot was down. So I want to talk a little bit about the way our tension works. When the foot is down, this thread is really, really, really tight. And so what it's doing on the bobbin is it's winding the bobbin so tight that it won't come off. Now, I had my foot up, so it's going to come off very easily. But if it doesn't come off easily, you're not supposed to pull it off from there. All right? What you've got to do is unwind the thread, because if you just pull it off, you can break the bobbin winder. The important thing when you're winding a bobbin through the needle is, just like when you're threading, you need to have your presser foot up. I think that makes sense to everybody, right? So let's talk a little bit about our tension when we're threading our machine. And I'm going to go and we'll switch over in a second to the other machine. But here's, I've got another little tip when you're putting your bobbin in. All right. Here's my bobbin. Most people, what they do is they drop the bobbin in, and then, and I'll come in a little closer here so you can see. And then they kind of try and get it into the tension in the front, but they're very, very loose about it. I prefer to hear, I want to hear that click. So when I drop the bobbin in, what I like to do is I'll put my finger, I'll bring the thread over the top, I'll put my finger here, and I want to hear that click. All right. And you will hear the click of it going into the tension. If you don't hear the click, pull it and make sure there's some tension on the thread. If you didn't get it into the tension, it's going to come out and come around. Now, the other last really important thing is a lot of people think, well, the thread cutter's here, I'm just going to come into the front and cut the tail away. But that creates a problem, because what we're meant to do is come up here to the top, there's a little loop, and then come down here to the bottom. We're going to put our cover on, and then we pull our tail away. And the reason we do that is it will leave a long enough tail in there so when we start sewing, the bobbin thread will get pulled up. If you don't leave that little loop there, when you start sewing, it won't pull up the bobbin thread. So it's really important to have that little loop there when you're doing that. When I'm, there was somebody asked a question about, am I using my pedal to wind the bobbin? on the sapphire 690Q, and on the opal nut 690Q, and on the sapphires, and on our older machines that do not have a separate bobbin winder, you have to use the foot pedal. On the machines that are more usually the ones that are embroidery machines, they have a separate step motor. Now the Topaz 50 doesn't, but from those newer machines above that, they have a separate step motor, so you don't use your foot pedal to do it. But on a regular sewing machine, you're going to use your foot pedal to wind the bobbin. And if there's any questions I don't ask, or if you've got another little question and I don't get to it, I'll come back afterwards when this is all over and make sure to talk about, answer your question a little bit better. So as far as putting the bobbin in, all right, when I'm talking about putting the bobbin in, it is really important, and I'm going to come back to my camera, all right, and this time I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to put my bobbin in place. So I'm going to put my finger right here. You hear that noise? That was it clicking into place. And then I come up to the top, and then I come down to the bobbin. And then I put my cover on, and then I pull my tail away. And now I'm ready to set up. A lot of people are used to having other machines. They think they have to bring your bobbin thread up, and you definitely do not have to bring your bobbin thread up. The moment you start sewing, it's going to pick up the bobbin thread right away, and then you're ready to go. You don't have to do anything special. I'm just going to put this down, and now when I put my foot on the pedal, it's just going to start sewing whatever stitch that I've selected. Okay, and as I go over here, I'm going to head over and just check on my Epic over here, because I got a couple other little techniques that I want to show you. Okay, so we're going to go up to threading. All right, now all of our machines that exist in the world, 150 years, have this traditional tension that's up here. We do have a large number of machines that have the deluxe stitch system, and that's a secondary tension that's down here. So often when you take your owner's classes and when you're learning how to do this, everybody will say to you, you really want to make sure to thread your machine firmly. So what I'm doing, all right, and I'll back it up a little bit here so you can see, is again, I'm going to hold my thread in my right hand, and I'm going to thread firmly. I'm going to come straight down. There is no need to floss it, but if your presser foot is up, and you can notice my presser foot is up, right? If I've got some tension on the thread and I come straight down, my thread is going right into the tension and also right into the deluxe stitch system. Then I'm going to come back up here firmly, and I'm still holding the thread to get some tension on it. Now I'm going through that little hook above the needle, and at that point, then I can let go of the tension. And I'm going to come up here, I'm going to cut my tail away. And now when I use the automatic thread holder, automatic thread threader, it threaded my needle, and I'm putting my thread underneath my foot into the back. One of the worst habits that people have is that when they're threading their machine, after they've threaded it through the needle, they don't stop and take the thread and put it underneath the foot. And so when they start sewing, it leaves a mess of thread underneath the foot, and they think it's something to do with the machine. Really, it's not. When you think about this, all right, after you've got your machine threaded through the needle, if you just leave this thread floating around and then you start sewing, that thread just kind of flops around here, and that first stitch doesn't catch. By putting the thread underneath the foot into the back, when I start sewing, all right, and I'm going to come here, I'm going to show you another technique of something I like to do. All right, so if I put my foot down and I start sewing, it's going to work perfectly. Now, I do have to be in sewing to do this. All right, now, for those of you that are quilters, and you're piecing your quilts, do you notice that the fix button's on? You will find that on all the machines, the opals, the sapphires, all of the different machines, that if you've used the thread cutter, that the fix button comes on automatically. And the reason for that is after the machine has cut the thread, it leaves a small little tail. And so that the next stitch, that fix button, really what it does is it's going to do a tie off. It's going to come forward and backwards and forward. And it just gives you that little bit of a short stitch that's going to catch so that the beginning of that stitch won't come undone. It's fabulous for most things you want to do. If you don't want the fix to come on, then don't touch the scissors or go into the tools and turn it off. When you're a quilter, they're the main people that I think find that they don't want the fix to come on. Like when you're strip piecing, I don't want the fix button to be on when I'm strip piecing. So I go into the tools and I turn it off. And then I want to show you this little technique for starting, because a lot of times we kind of forget about how wonderful our machine is, having the needle up, down, and how easy it is to start going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show you in the tools how to turn the fix button off. If you want to do it, you can always turn it back at any point you want. You could say, okay, I'm sewing and now I want the fix button on. You can touch the button on the front, or you can turn it back on in the tools too. All right. So I'm going to come back over, and if I want to turn it off, I can just turn the button off here, or I can go into the tools on all of my machines. I'm going to go to the tools. Wait a second here. And I can go to there's default settings, there's temporary settings, and here is the button where I can turn the fix off. And then it's only going to come on now when I want it to come on. So over here, if I don't want it to come on when I start sewing, it will just leave it off. Now, for those of you that are strip piecers who like to work and you're speed sewers, all right, I've got my thread underneath my foot and to the back. I've got my bobbin is my bobbin in my tension. You can tell my bobbin's in my tension because the thread comes from the front over the top to the back like that. All right. Now, what I do is before I even have my fabric underneath there, I'm going to set my needle so it stops in the down position. Now, if I'm going to be doing strip piecing, I would put my fabric right up against the needle, and now that first stitch is going to catch right onto my fabric, and I'm ready to go. We do have our 1/4 inch stitch programmed into all of our machines. On the Epic 2, you're going to find it stitch number 1 in the D menu. On some of our older machines like the Diamond Royale or the Ruby Royale, you will find that in menu E. And then on the Opal, if you look at the Opal, you will see menu 2, stitch number 1, has got a 1/4 inch programmed in foot stitch. And you would use that with the A foot. And then you would get your perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay. So a lot of times, little things about setting up, as I go through and I get to travel and see all of you, it's so fun listening to all of you. And everybody's got their own little pet peeve of, oh, I wish it would do this. And I often hear people say, well, I don't want the fix stitch to come on. That's all in our control. We can turn those features on or off so that they will only work when we want them to work. And that's a fabulous thing. And that's the way it should be, right? We don't want our machine to control us. We want to set our machine so we're using it the way we want to use it. Now, many of you that are in embroiderers have had times where you look at a problem and you think, well, the bobbin thread's showing on the top. What's going on here? Why is that happening? Almost always it's a very simple reason. And so I set up a couple of embroideries that I'm going to show you, and we'll talk about how you can recognize when you have a problem and how you can solve it. Okay. I've got this hoop that I did an embroidery on. All right. Now, this was an embroidery I did. This is the way it was supposed to look. But what was happening is that all the white you see is bobbin thread. Now, the machine still stitched fine, but what I was getting was the bobbin thread coming up above. And I bet that's never happened to any of you, right? When you look at the back, you can actually see that there's no embroidery thread showing on the back except for this little bit. Now, if this ever happens to you, that you see bobbin thread on the top, let me just get this out of here. Usually, there's only two things it can be. When you're looking at your bobbin, all right, and I'm going to just show you this. I'm going to pull this up close. Okay. When you put your bobbin into your machine, you might have thought that you clicked it into the tension, but it didn't go. So you're pulling it here like this. All right. You put your bobbin cover on. You pull the tail away. Let me just pull that away. It's not, you can see it's not even wanting to pull it away, right? Because it's not in the tension. But so when I start sewing, the bobbin thread will come up and it will do a really nice job of sewing, but the balance is off. And the reason that I know it's not in the tension is that there's no thread that comes from the top tension over the top of the bobbin. Okay. So whenever you have a problem where you're seeing bobbin thread on the top, either your bobbin is not in the tension, or the other possibility is it could be caught somewhere up here near the needle. And if the thread, maybe the thread got caught somewhere, like maybe it got caught here, right? And it won't release it. It'll hold the thread really tight. And because it's holding the thread really tight, then it's pulling up the bobbin thread because this thread can't go anymore. So especially on these machines, we have a special spool cap that I really, really love. Okay, this cap, it's got a flat end and it's got that little divot end. If you're using spools that look like this and that can sit in front of it, inside of it like that, then this is the way you use it, with this part straight up. And what it does is it kind of sinks in there and it stops the thread from getting caught underneath. But there are many other different types of spools that when you put it on, it can't go on there flat. And so in that case, if you've got a spool that won't go on there flat, you're going to turn it over and use this flat side when you put it on. Okay, that can solve a lot of those problems of your thread getting caught. And I'm going to sit down here for a second and show. So as you're looking at something like this, the secret is do not keep sewing. Stop your machine. You should not be seeing bobbin thread on the surface. So almost always when you're seeing bobbin thread on the surface, that's a sign that your machine's not threaded right. Okay. If you see bobbin thread on the top, the problem is down below. It means your bobbin is not in the tension. Now, this is what the design should look like. In this case, I started embroidering again, and I heard a loud clink, 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 like my machine was drowning at me. And when I turned it over, I have a mess of thread. So if you have a problem underneath that you've got a mess of thread like that, what most people think is, well, the mess of threads on the bottom, that must mean there's a problem with my bobbin. But that's not it. It's the opposite. So if you have a mess of thread underneath, that means your upper thread is not in the take-up arm. Okay? And, you know, I'm not saying 100% of the time, 99% of the time, if you have a mess of thread underneath, the thread is not on the take-up arm. So you need to thread the upper thread. What a lot of people do is they think, okay, the problem's underneath, I'll fix the bobbin and check the bobbin, and then they start up their machine again and they have the same problem. And then that's meltdown time, right? Because you're having the same problem and you can't solve it. So it's really important to know that 99% of the time, these are things that are just simple fixes. You've just got to think through the logic of it a little bit. And almost all the time, if you have bobbin thread on top, it's usually a problem with your bobbin. Either it didn't get clicked into the tension or something's happening. Maybe there's dust or lint or something that's gotten in there. Maybe it's time to clean out your bobbin case. Your embroidery should look like you expect to look, right? If you don't want to have threads showing on the back of it, you're going to turn your cut off, your cut command off. But if you see that big mess of thread on the bottom, your first instinct should be to rethread your upper thread. We have a few questions here, so let's go back. One of the questions was, where do you place your fabric for the 1/4 inch stitch setting? I'll go back and I'll show you that again, okay? And another question is this a 1/4 inch, a scant 1/4 inch? Well, these are great questions. I'm going to make sure that I'll go back and show you that. And then the next question is, how does the 1/4 inch stitch work with the IDF 1/4 inch adjustable foot? All right. And then I have one other question, but I don't think it's related to the 1/4 inch. So let me just look at that. How do you fix eyelashes when embroidering? Usually happens when I'm doing edge to edge. Oh, that is a whole other separate thing, but that is actually a really easy answer. So I'm going to try and get to the eyelash question in a second, because I think it's a really important question to answer. But let's go back to our machines and talk about how you can decide a 1/4 inch. We obviously have at least 6, 7 different 1/4 inch feet, right? A lot of the 1/4 inch feet have a hole in the center. I personally like to do a scant 1/4 inch. I would rather use my A foot and go to the programmed in 1/4 inch stitch. And if I go back, let's go back here. All right. And I'm going to go to my programmed in stitch. So I will go to menu 1, stitch 1. All right. Whoops. And that is menu 2. Sorry. Stitch 1. And then I can touch OK. Now, my needle moved over so that I'm going to line up the raw edge of my fabric with the right side of that foot. The best way to test whether this is what you consider a scant 1/4 inch is take yourself some fabric, cut it into 2.5 inch strips, right? Or squares. Cut yourself like 10 2.5 inch squares. Sew them together. You know that if you put a 2.5 inch square and a 2.5 inch square, if you lose the 1/2 inch seam allowance, you know what that size should be. So when you go and you iron it and press it and get your fabric, put the ruler on top of it. Does it give you the measurement that you need? Really, every ruler is different. Depending upon what foot you're using, that'll give you a different result too. The most important thing you need to know is that on most of our machines, we have 29 needle positions. And on our Epic 2, we have 37 needle positions. So if I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance and I find that my 12.5 inch block, it didn't end up 12.5 inches. Maybe it ends up 12.25. That means I need to take less of a seam allowance, right? I need to take more scant of seam allowance. Well, then what I do is I go over to my machine, and where I see the 1.8, that is my needle position. So if I want to take less of a seam allowance, I'm going to move that to 2, or I could even move it to 2.3. And now my needle has now been moved farther to the right, and I can get the scant 1/4 inch I'm looking for. I just got a question about, is the thread problem true for machines other than Husqvarna Viking? And I take it you're talking about when you're seeing bobbin thread, or if you have a mess of thread here. This is true for every embroidery machine that exists since the beginning of time. All right. Doesn't matter what brand you are. If you're seeing bobbin thread and normally your machine does a great job with your embroidery, and that's the result you get, and you're seeing bobbin thread on the top, I guarantee you your bobbin thread isn't in the tension. And if you are threading your machine and you're loosey-goosey about it and you didn't get it on the take-up arm, then when you start embroidering, your machine's going to make this loud, messy kind of sound. You know, when you look underneath, you're going to have a mess of thread like that. That's because your thread didn't get seated in the take-up lever properly or in the tension properly, and it came out. And so this is true of every embroidery machine and actually every sewing machine. Now, I do want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go back. I've got a couple other things to show you, but I did want to remind everybody that they started something new with this year, that they put a survey that you can, there's going to be a link. Okay. They're going to post a link on it. So after this event is over with, they'd like everybody to go in there and let everybody know what you think. Do you like this kind of Facebook Live? Do you have other ideas? There's just a few short questions. And because we really love presenting these Facebook Lives to you. And we're hoping that we can get some input into what you'd like, what other kinds of things you'd like to hear about. And I do apologize for my voice. I'm just getting over a cold that my husband gave me. So I'm just glad that it lasted all the way through. But please fill out the survey and make sure that you get your chance to tell us what you want to see from us on our Facebook Lives. All I ask is you be gentle, and because we're so excited to be doing this for you. So if you've got some ideas of what you'd like to see and more things that you would like to find, then by all means, put your comments down there, because the more people that respond, the better chance that we have of making sure that we're bringing you what you want to see, okay? If anybody's question that I haven't answered, if we go back, I'll go back after it's all over, and I'll go through and answer everybody very specifically about the scant 1/4 of an inch and all of that. But remember, our machines can be set the way we want them to be, right? If we have a way that we like to do our 1/4 of an inch, and quite honestly, what I consider a 1/4 of an inch and what you consider a 1/4 of an inch may be two different things. And both of us are right. There is no carpenter's 1/4 of an inch that is exactly right, because I may sew and like to have a little bit of fabric sticking out the end, and you may sew that you have it just peeking right at the edge of the foot and there's no fabric coming out. Each different person is going to sew a little bit different. It's really important that you experiment with what you consider a scant 1/4 of an inch. All I'm telling you is every one of our machines, except for the emeralds, has a programmed in 1/4 of an inch stitch. If you want to make it more scant, move the needle to the right. All of our machines have at least 29 to 37 needle positions. So you can set it. Once you know that's where you like it to be, then that's what you do. When you're building a quilt, you always go to that setting, and then you know that that's what you're going to get. For anybody that does find that they have a little bit of a trouble sewing straight, or you feel like you want to adjust your seam allowance, this is kind of a nifty little tool. It's a magnetic seam guide. And so if I'm over here on my icon, I'm on my Opal 690Q, you can see it sticks to the stitch plate, and it can really help so that guide your fabric so you know that it's going in straight, and you can kind of adjust it. So maybe you want your seam allowance to be a little bit wider. You can take it and set your seam allowance to where you want. Maybe you want your seam allowance to be 2 inches or 1.5 inches. You can kind of adjust it and move it over like that. This is a really handy tool when you've got kids sewing, and it's something that a lot of people don't realize it's out there, but this can really make life a lot easier if you're a beginner sewer and you're having trouble, sewing your seams and keeping it consistent. What happens is both the fabrics butt against this edge, and so it makes it a little easier for you to sew. If anybody's interested, put a note there, and Meredith will post the part number for you so you can find that at your dealer or gallery store. I hope you've had fun today, and Happy New Year, everybody. And I hope you'll have a wonderful time sewing and embroidering. And if you've got any other questions I didn't answer, make sure to write them down and I'll come back and answer them for you. And it's just been a joy to be with you today. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you again sometime soon. Bye-bye.